Imagine a young digital influencer, Bruna B, a woman navigating the fast-paced world of fashion, beauty, and likes. Flashing lights, perfect angles, short captions, and curated smiles. She wasn't looking for a love story, but love has a strange way of finding us when we least expect it. And sometimes it comes wearing cleats. When she met Neymar Jr., one of the biggest football stars in the world, everything changed. What started as a modern fairy tale quickly became an emotional roller coaster. One filled with passion, heartbreak, public pressure, and moments of quiet despair. Bruna, already known for her strong presence online and undeniable charm, captured Neymar's heart in 2021. At first, they kept things quiet, intimate, private. But love like that doesn't stay in the shadows for long. Not when your partner is followed by paparazzi, loved by millions, and chased by headlines. Soon, their relationship was everywhere. Every smile was analyzed, every silence questioned, every photo a headline. To the outside world, she was Neymar's girlfriend. But behind the scenes, she was a woman torn between two lives. The peaceful digital creator she once was, and the emotional chaos of loving someone who belonged to the world. It looked like a dream, but like every great story, not everything was what it seemed, and what no one expected, not even Bruna, was how this story would unfold. Because some love stories break you, some leave scars, but some, they give you a reason to rise again. Welcome to the true story of Bruna B and what she did when the cameras stopped flashing. At first, the attention felt almost magical. Every photo of Bruna and Neymar became a headline. Every glance, every gesture, every accidental Instagram story turned into fuel for speculation. They looked happy, they looked powerful, they looked like a couple built for the spotlight. But the spotlight has a price. And soon, Bruna began to understand what it meant to love someone who belonged to the entire world. There were rumors, women claiming to have messages from Neymar, whispers of betrayal, articles that quoted anonymous sources and painted her as either naive or complicit. Each time, Bruna stayed silent, not because she didn't feel pain, but because silence was her armor, because speaking out would only give the tabloids more ink to spill. People online said she was weak. Others called her smart for holding on to a man with power. But nobody asked the real question. What happens when your private heartbreak becomes public entertainment? Behind the scenes, Bruna was no longer just navigating love. She was learning how to survive in a relationship that had turned into a performance. A daily show for millions, most of whom didn't care how she felt. Still, she stayed. Because love is complicated. Because forgiveness is easier to give than self-respect is to reclaim. And maybe, deep down, she believed the version of Neymar that wasn't in the headlines. The one who kissed her belly, the one who promised a future, the one who whispered, "You're my family now." But a promise is just a word, and Bruna was about to learn what happens when the words run out. In 23, the world woke up to an unexpected post. A photo. Soft, intimate, full of light. Bruna and Neymar, their hands together on her growing belly. The caption was gentle but powerful. "We dream of your life. we plan your airball, and knowing you are coming fills our hearts with love. Bruna was pregnant. For a moment, the world paused, and in that pause, there was a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe the scandals would fade. Maybe love, in its most natural form, would rebuild what was broken. But reality has a way of pushing its way back in. Just weeks after the announcement, Neymar's name was again in the headlines, though this time not for his goals on the field, but for messages he allegedly sent to other women. Screenshots, DMs, accusations, and Bruna, glowing with the softness of motherhood, was caught in the middle. Again. This time, the betrayal wasn't just about her. It was about the child growing inside her. People begged her to leave, to stand up, to show strength. But the world forgets. Strength looks different when you're protecting more than just yourself. Bruna didn't lash out. She didn't hold press conferences. She didn't sell interviews. Instead, she went quiet. And in that silence, something shifted. She wasn't hiding. She was preparing, because when you carry a life, you start to see your own life differently. You start to ask hard questions. What kind of woman do I want to be? Not just for the world to see, but for my daughter to learn from. What kind of future do I want her to inherit? These weren't easy questions, but Bruna was no longer the woman she was when the story began. She was changing, and something inside her was starting to grow. Not just a child, but a new version of herself. The pressure didn't stop. It evolved. Even as Bruna's belly grew, so did the scrutiny. Every photo she posted was dissected. Was she smiling enough? Was Neymar still by her side? Why was she silent about the rumors? And then came the moment that shifted everything. One night, at a high-profile event, Neymar was photographed without her. Again. This time, the whispers turned into roars. More messages surfaced. More women spoke out. And Bruna? She didn't post a single word. But a few days later, in the quiet of an Instagram story, she unfollowed Neymar. No public statement, no dramatic announcement, just one silent click. It was subtle, but to those paying attention, it was a scream. People speculated, she's done. She's just playing games. She'll go back. They always go back. But what no one knew was that Bruna was facing something far deeper than internet gossip. She was sitting alone in a home they once dreamed of filling with laughter. She was packing tiny clothes into drawers that still smelled of fresh paint. She was preparing to become a mother, while slowly realizing she might be doing it alone. That's the kind of heartbreak no one tweets about. The kind that doesn't trend. In private, she wept. Not just for what had happened, but for the woman she had become in the process. The one who had tolerated silence. Who had tried to protect someone who wouldn't protect her back. Who had put love on a pedestal and lost herself underneath it. But here's the thing about Bruna. She may have broken, but she didn't stay broken. Because sometimes, the moment you feel most lost is the exact moment you begin to wake up. Bruna disappeared from the spotlight. No red carpets, no paparazzi at restaurants, no staged "we're okay" photos with Neymar. Instead, her feed became something else. Soft lighting, books on parenting, snippets of calm mornings, a hand resting on her belly. Not for likes, but for connection. She wasn't trying to convince anyone she was happy. She was simply becoming. In silence, Bruna began to reclaim her voice. Not with quotes or defiance, but with choices. She moved. She set boundaries. She limited who had access to her space, to her energy, to her baby. While headlines still tried to define her, she quietly rewrote the narrative. No longer Neymar's girlfriend. No longer the betrayed woman. Now, just Bruna. A woman building her life on her own terms. But here's what made it powerful. She didn't erase the past. She didn't pretend it didn't happen. She carried it with her, but differently now. Like a scar that stopped bleeding. Like a lesson that stopped haunting. Because Bruna understood something most people never realize. You don't need to announce your healing. You just need to live it. And in those quiet, sacred days, she prepared for something greater than headlines. She prepared for motherhood, not as a symbol, not as a redemption arc, but as a woman ready to break a cycle, to raise a daughter in truth, to become the kind of mother she herself needed when her world fell apart. This wasn't the Bruna people followed in 2021. This was a new woman, one forged not in fairy tales, but in fire. And soon that fire would give birth to something more than a child. It would give birth to a voice the world could no longer ignore. The day her daughter was born, something else was born too. Not just a baby, not just a name in the press, but a new identity for Bruna. She named her May Vi, which means my life. And in that single word, Bruna captured the journey she had taken, from confusion to clarity, from heartbreak to purpose. Photos surfaced, a tiny hand curled around hers, a tired but radiant smile. Neymar was there. The headlines celebrated the reunion, but Bruna's eyes told a different story. Yes, he was present. Yes, he was part of that moment. But she was the anchor now. She no longer needed promises to feel secure. She no longer needed headlines to feel seen. She had found the only thing that made sense. The only thing that didn't lie. Her daughter. While the world speculated on whether she and Neymar were together again, Bruna quietly focused on building something far more real than labels. She sang lullabies at 3 a.m. She changed diapers between brand deals and blog posts. She balanced postpartum hormones with public expectations. And still, she stood tall. Because now, every decision she made had a mirror. And that mirror had eyes watching her. Eyes that would learn how to love based on how she loved herself. Bruna wasn't just a mother now. She was an example. And deep down, she knew something that would soon shape the next chapter. You can't control how someone loves you, but you can control how you rise when they don't. For weeks, Bruna said nothing. No statements, no clarifications, no passive-aggressive quotes or Instagram hints. And still, her presence was louder than ever. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. The world expected her to cling to Neymar, to keep trying, to accept the bare minimum in exchange for status and comfort. Instead, she began to show a different version of herself. Partnerships with brands that had nothing to do with him. Photo shoots where her joy wasn't staged. It was rooted. Moments with Mavi that weren't posted for validation, but shared like whispered truths. People noticed. She's glowing, they said. She's changed, they whispered. But what they were really seeing was a woman finally stepping into her own story. She had entered the relationship in his shadow, but she was walking out in her own light. And that's when everything turned. Not in the headlines, not in the comments section, But in Bruna herself, she no longer waited for Neymar to do better. She no longer wished for apologies or explanations. She no longer needed the love of a man to prove her worth, because she had built something stronger than romance, self-respect. And with that came peace. Not the kind you post about, the kind that lets you sleep, the kind that lets you look your daughter in the eyes and say, you don't have to stay where you're not cherished. You don't have to beg to be chosen. You are enough, on your own. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It was the quiet, radiant return of a woman to herself. And that's what makes a third act unforgettable. There was no press conference, no dramatic finale, no official closure or public apology. Just a quiet transformation. Bruna Biancardi didn't need a headline to validate her worth. She had walked through betrayal, carried the weight of public humiliation, and stood in the storm of other people's chaos, and survived. But survival wasn't the ending, it was the beginning. She transformed silence into strength. She turned absence into clarity. She stopped chasing redemption from someone who never saw her value, and instead began to rediscover herself, not as a partner, not as a public figure, but as a whole woman. When people now asked, is she still with him? She smiled, because they were asking the wrong question. The real question was, who is she now, without him? Bruna was no longer defined by romance or rejection. She was defined by how she rebuilt. She was a mother, yes, but she was also a creator of her own peace. A woman who could walk into a room and no longer feel the need to explain the past, because she had made peace with it, not by forgetting, but by learning. She no longer needed to respond to every rumor. Her life had become the answer, and what it said was simple. You can start over without making a scene. You can reclaim your life without burning down the past. You can choose quiet and still be powerful. The lights didn't dim when she stepped out of the relationship. They refocused on her. Not the man beside her, but the woman becoming more of herself. Bruna wasn't just walking away from a chapter. She was walking toward her own authorship. And soon, the world would see. This wasn't a comeback. It was a becoming. Outside the spotlight, Bruna's world moved slower, but deeper. There were no red carpets, no viral posts, just morning light spilling onto a kitchen floor, and the sound of tiny feet chasing laughter. In the quiet of her new life, she wasn't seeking to be seen. She was learning how to be still. She made pancakes while her daughter scribbled on the walls. She danced barefoot in the living room to songs that once reminded her of pain, but now reminded her of strength. There were still questions. People still speculated, still gossiped, still wondered if she'd go back. But Bruna didn't answer them, because healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers in the way she sets her phone down during dinner. It whispers in the smile she gives herself in the mirror. It whispers in the stories she tells her daughter at bedtime. Stories not about princesses saved by princes, but about girls who save themselves. And in those quiet moments, Bruna knew something powerful. She had once been a character in someone else's script. Now, she held the pen. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Because the third act isn't just the final chapter. It's the moment the audience leans forward, not to watch a fall, but to witness a rise. She survived the noise. She outgrew the silence. She found freedom not in leaving someone, but in returning to herself. And when the credits roll, Bruna B won't be remembered for who she loved, but for how she reclaimed her voice and used it to write a new beginning.